tell me, what is the story with Harland and Wolff? What's going on there?
That's funny. It's a little reminder of home. That's
Did your people work in Harland and Wolff or something?
No, I don't think so.
No?
I don't know. But it was. I wonder if I was in my school. There were houses, and I wonder if I was in Harland and Wolff. I don't think they had. I think they had Sirocco. Is that what the company was called that owned Harland and Wolff? Sirocco, I'm not sure.
Sirocco was like the aerospace company.
That was
right?
the aerospace company. Yeah. No, I think I was in that house in my school. Yeah.
Right.
But
because I remember my mother telling me stories about Harland and Wolff when they built the Titanic. They wrote all these messages on the hull, like fuck the Pope and down with fucking Catholic Ireland and all this kind of shit.
Oh yeah.
And then obviously when it sank, she said all the people on the falls were out celebrating because.
Is that right? All that stuff that was written in there.
Is that poetic justice of some kind?
Very good. Well, there are very few nationalists working, I guess, in Harland and Wolff.
You wouldn't get a job.
You wouldn't get a job.
No, they weren't allowed.
Yeah, my goodness. Yeah. Things have gone downhill since those days. Well, Catholics can get jobs.
Worse. Yeah, they've all got jobs.
The good old days.
They've all got jobs. They go to Queens. It's horrible.
Well, on that note, I'm going to just introduce you to a few people, and we're going to have a chat. So this is Sean McDonald. I'm pronouncing McDonald correctly.
You are indeed.
I always just worry. People have different pronunciations for things.
Do they? For McDonald's, it's just like the burgers.
McDonald's easy. That was an easy one, to be honest. And you're a psychotherapeutic psychoanalyst?
Yeah, the other way around. Psychoanalytic psychotherapist.
Okay. Is there a difference, or is it just a way
it's
to
just
say
a
it?
nomenclature, I believe.
Very good. And you have a kind of Lacanian training, is that right?
Yeah, I did my training in Ireland. My master's was in psychoanalytic psychotherapy, which is Freudian Lacanian. Yeah.
Very good. I'm surprised there's a big Lacanian school in Ireland.
There are many Lacanians in Dublin, and there are many schools within Dublin itself. I think there are like 5 schools of psychoanalysis, Lacanian psychoanalysis.
Wow.
Because with Freud and Lacan, everything splits.
Yeah.
So it becomes quite difficult to navigate your way around these different beliefs, I guess.
Yeah.
Schisms.
Yes. Yeah, and which is like that. That's a good, interesting thing in itself. Is you kind of think of psychotherapists, psychoanalysts as being, they have done a lot of therapy in their time and being healthy people, but you do find there's sometimes conflicts, sometimes healthy schisms and sometimes unhealthy schisms. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. There are healthy schisms, and then there are personality kind of schisms. And I don't think Freud or Lacan were immune to those things themselves. I mean, Freud obviously had his differences with Jung and with Breuer and all these people, all these other kind of preeminent people in his time. And I guess Freud, for all his genius, he was quite egotistical in his own way. I mean, like in the interpretation of dreams, he talks about like there'll be a plaque put on his house that says, "Here on this date in 1899, the discovery of dreams was made by Sigmund Freud." So,
although he was right, is that a case of the kind of paranoid person just happening to be empirically correct, because he was, or was he just very aware of his own genius?
I think he was aware that he was doing something different, and I think he was aware that he had, because he was originally like a biologist. He worked on anatomy and stuff like that, and he moved from that into hypnotherapy, and he realized that during the hypnotherapy that it was suggestion that was the problem. So it still happens today in psychotherapy, where the therapist will believe that they know what the client is talking about, and they kind of interject and they kind of jump in, and it happens in hypnotherapy when it suggests something, right? So you're leading somebody down a road, okay? So it's a corrective experience in that sense, right? So he realized that if I just suggest things to people, then they're just going to give me the answers they want, okay? Or they think I want. So he had to kind of break away from that, and I think that was the break with Breuer originally, and then he developed the idea of free association.
Yeah. I mean, that, by the way, that's something that Lacan seems to be very keen on, is that some forms of psychoanalysis do want to lead to some extent the analyze and, but like countertransference and using that. But Lacan seems to be kind of more strict about saying, like, try to intervene as little as possible. Would that be correct?
Yeah, but he doesn't talk about transference and countertransfer. He just calls it transference, and he believes that like it kind of flows between the people.
Yeah.
So he would say, don't analyze the transference, analyze in the transference. So you've got to accept whatever object you're being for the analyson's unconscious, whatever object you're being, you have to accept that, even if you don't know what it is, which we don't know most of the time. So you've got to accept that and not try to step outside of it.
Yeah.
And kind of say, well, look at what you're doing. Because that objectifies somebody.
Yes.
Or it minimizes or normalizes their individuality.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It generalizes it.
Yeah.
You're doing this because of that.
Yeah.
Whereas we really don't know why people do things.
Yeah.
Only they know why. And even they don't know why.
Yeah.
So
and
it's pretty complicated.
Yeah. And when you use the word object, in psychoanalysis, the object is a type of internalized kind of relation to another. So whenever you say about the analyst becoming an object, for say me, if I'm the analysand, that means in a way you're kind of an externalization of some sort of maybe internal relationship with my father. Is that what you mean by object? Or,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Broadly speaking. Yeah.
More or less, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, there's the subject who's the analysand. Most of the time it's the subject, the split subject, right? There's split between the conscious and the unconscious.
Yeah.
Okay? And then they have been treated as objects, or they've been seen as objects by people, right? Okay, so they've experienced what it's like to be objectified, but they've also objectified.
Yeah.
And not I don't mean objectified in a negative sense
Yes.
per se, it's just, that is just the psychical reality, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, by the way, one other thing about Freud, because
Yes.
and we haven't
There's
even
a lot
gone
of things
into-
about Freud.
There's a lot of
yeah.
things about Freud, but I think he was right to kind of like kick Jung out and to be a little bit strict, because Freud seemed to he had a sense of what he was doing. He had a sense that he was doing something unique, something important, and I guess had a sense that it could be watered down very early on, and actually he had to be very strict to try to keep the theory very pure in the early days, because if you kind of if you let too many people in, it can dilute it very, very easily. So I can kind of see why for Freud he was very strict.
Well, he certainly had a clarity about his purpose, right?
Yeah.
He was very clear in that he was like a good old-fashioned searcher, he just wanted to search and to find things.
Yeah.
And my understanding of, I don't know a great deal about Jung at all, but my understanding of where their split comes from, it's about infantile sexuality. And Freud's assertion that, children do have a sexual life, they play with their whittlers and all that kind of stuff, right? And they have a curiosity.
Yeah.
But Jung didn't, to my understanding, he didn't believe that. And that was the basis of their fissure, right? The basis of their break.
Yeah, and I think for me, the way I then think that it parses itself out, and see what you think about this, is in the central notion of the unconscious, is that for Jung, he went more in this notion of the unconscious, one as a type of compensatory mechanism. It's a type of balance between consciousness and unconscious. Right. So for Jung, if you have a very strong love of somebody that's kind of like completely out of sync, your unconscious might actually try to rebalance that by giving you dreams where that person is ugly or weak. And it's this sense of this balance. Whereas for Freud, the unconscious isn't so much a thing, it's kind of the split itself. You can't kind of find balance with the unconscious. Like the unconscious is what brings imbalance. It's what kind of fundamentally imbalances the subject. So that's how I parse them out.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
Well, like I said, I don't know a great deal about Jung, but my understanding is that he also speaks about a thing called the collective unconscious, right? So, which I believe is his idea of like culture and inheritance, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and myths and all of this. This is what he believes is the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
Whereas Freud, and then later clarified by Lacan, I guess, is that the unconscious is very individual.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We our unconscious speaks, but it speaks our own language, and it's a mixture of reality, of imaginary things, and fantasy, right? So that for me is the main difference. That's how I try to parse them.
I have a very good analogy for the unconscious that you like. Let's see what you think. It's from Northern Ireland. It's Derry.
I'm bound to like it.
Yeah, it's the difference between Derry and Londonderry. Right, a city that it's one city, And during the Troubles, as you know, there, you either called it Derry or Londonderry.
Yes.
And if you called it Derry, you were a dirty nationalist.
Obviously.
And if you called it Londonderry, you were a good, honest Protestant boy, right?
Yes.
And so you could never name the city without getting in trouble, and you had to be very careful. And so for me, then if you remember, Jerry,
Jerry, the DJ, Stroke City, he used to call it.
Yeah, Stroke City,
yeah.
Exactly.
Jerry something, wasn't
yeah,
it?
Yeah, I can't remember his name, but he's a radio
Nolan
personality.
Or something.
No, you're mixing up Stephen Nolan with Anderson.
Jerry Anderson.
That's right. He started calling it Stroke City.
That's right, yeah.
Because some people would say on the news, Derry stroke Londonderry. That's why they got away with it on the news. They would call it Derry stroke Londonderry, and he called it Stroke City. And I was like, oh, that's the unconscious. It's what kind of, there's one city, but it's fundamentally destabilized from within. And the unconscious isn't one kind of worldview or the other. It's kind of what makes the city not at one with itself. What do you think of that?
Well, I guess it's the otherness, right? It's the otherness when, if you want to talk about the North, or the occupied 6 counties, as we call it, we could say that it's the otherness, right? It's the otherness of Protestantism, the otherness of nationalism, right? That's the unconscious, is the otherness. And then Freud could have called it like the narcissism of minor differences, because really, what's the difference between a Protestant and a Catholic, right?
Yeah.
Apart from certain religious beliefs about whether Mary
I mean, that's the hilarious
thing. Had the real sex or only had the imaginary sex, right?
Yeah, I mean, like we weren't even different religions. I mean, it was still Christianity.
It's an offshoot, right?
It's an offshoot, yeah.
But it's that otherness, right? Yeah. So, to go back to the North, there is this irrational fear among loyalists, among nationalists of what the other is.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
There's an unknown. And that's what the unconscious is. I don't know what this other is.
Right.
And it's not necessarily that we're different.
Yeah.
But we assume a difference.
Yes.
Right? And this idea of difference is very important as well.
Yeah. So there's that notion of otherness, but then also how does that connect with this notion of just a kind of split that doesn't exist in reality, but a split that exists in the symbolic? So like Londonderry, like the stroke doesn't exist in reality. It's purely an effect of this kind of like not at oneness within the city. So I suppose those are two interconnected things, otherness and is there...
Well, I guess even before it became Derry or Londonderry, it was just a place, right? So language designated it, nominated it as Derry, and then later as Londonderry.
Yeah.
Right, okay, so when you talk about this idea of the symbolic, I guess you're talking about Lacan's idea of the symbolic and the three orders, okay? So really, when we talk about symbolic, we're talking about culture, we're talking about language, particularly the imposition of a language on a child, okay?
Yeah.
And they have to assume language in order to enter into the world. So when they assume language and they start to speak and they start to categorize things through language and differentiate things, that's when the symbolic is born, and it's also when we separate out from the animal world in that sense, the real, as Lacan will call it, right?
Yeah.
Like this idea of the real, one of my professors spoke about it and said it's like when you trip, right? That's what the real is. It's that moment where the ground falls from under your feet and you completely lose all kind of tethering to the world.
Yeah.
Okay? You're tethering to your reality.
Right.
That's the real. So it slips in and it invades on the symbolic, I guess. But we always find our feet again, and the words come, and we keep on talking, and we paper over these cracks. But it's there. And
the cracks, the interesting thing. And by the way, we'll come back to kind of Christmas in a second, because I did call it Surviving Christmas, but I like the fact this is just going to go lots of different.
Let's just survive the Northern Irish Troubles, and then we can survive Christmas after that.
Absolutely. The split, so this symbolic creates cracks. That's why I like the kind of the stroke in Londonderry is like it's a crack, but it's a crack that's created by language. That's what the real is for Lacan, isn't it? Isn't that right? It's kind of it's the cracks in the symbolic edifice.
Well, it's the lack of the symbolic or language's ability, particularly to symbolize everything.
Yeah.
we can't symbolize everything through language, okay? It's a semiotic system, etc., but we cannot symbolize everything. We cannot describe reality through words.
Yeah.
We can approximate, right, or we can represent, which is what we talk about a lot, representation, like a dream is a representation of something, right? So we can represent things through words, but we can never get to the heart of it. There's something that's gone.
Yeah. And that could be seen, that can be seen as an evolution. I mean, some people will hear that and go, okay, language can never achieve this. But another way of looking at it is we used to have communication. Animals have communication, which is where they do accurately describe exactly how they feel. When a bird sings, a certain signal is sent out. It's completely picked up the way it should be. I mean, there can be changes, but there's no ambiguity in the signal. The other birds know what it means, a warning signal, a mating signal, etc. Or computer languages, where a computer communicates in such a way that everything is kind of put across.
Right.
But then at a certain point, no means yes. At a certain point, communication becomes language. And when the way I think of it is communication is kind of like is a very accurate description. But language comes in whenever that starts to fall apart and ambiguity enters.
Whenever what starts to fall apart, the communication element, and the understanding of communication. Is that what you mean?
Or when yes can mean no and no can mean yes. Whenever at a certain point, let's say like a myth of history, at a certain point an animal made a signal of danger whenever they really were trying to communicate something else. Like they ambiguity and lies became part of the very nature of the communication.
And is that like the beginning of language? Is that what you mean?
See, that's what I'm wondering, is that's the beginning of language. Is language, communication is when no means no. And then language is whenever no means yes. You know, you say to somebody, you know, a father says to their kid, you know, I don't want you going out and getting drunk with your friends. But deep down, they'd be disappointed if you weren't going out and having a few drinks with them, right? So you know the no means yes. Or your parent says, I don't want you to fight in school, but then they find out that you don't stand up for yourself and hit the bully, and they're kind of say, oh yeah, it was great, but you know that they mean it wasn't great. See, that's where I kind of go like, that's where communication becomes language.
Right, okay.
What do you think of that? I don't know.
Well, I guess in psychoanalysis, in therapy, or whatever you want to call it, we separate between what is uttered and what is enunciated, okay? And what I utter is not necessarily what you hear. And that's the kind of difficulty with language, okay? Because I speak from here and you hear from there.
Yeah.
So you hear through your own particularities, okay? And your own experiences. So I could say something like, because obviously you grew up in the Protestant tradition in Northern Ireland, and my parents were Catholic tradition. So I could say something to you that I would say to somebody else, and they would laugh, and you may not laugh.
Oh yeah.
Right? Okay. So you see it through your own prism in that sense, which is fine.
Yeah.
That's what we do. But in terms of so that's what I utter, and then what you hear, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so this is where the idea of like slips of the tongue and parapraxis and all these formations of the unconscious that Freud talks about. Yeah, that's where they come out, because you say something and I hear it and I reflect it back to you in a different way, and maybe you look at it then in a slightly different way, and like, oh, maybe I am being bigoted or whatever. Yeah, I'm speaking for myself.
And also then it's also that you can say things that you don't know you're saying. I mean,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because
we speak and we don't know what we say.
Yeah.
Well, you've had partners, right?
Yeah.
And you said something to them, and they've gone, and they've gotten angry about it, okay? And they go, no, that's not what I meant.
Yeah.
But that's what I heard.
Yes.
So something gets lost in translation or added in translation when it goes from the giver to the receiver.
And the most extreme, obviously, is when you actually do say, it's like you're with a partner and you call them by the name of your ex-partner, where like you literally, it's not even that they hear something in what you've said, is that you actually say something that you don't hear yourself saying.
That's your unconscious talking.
Yeah. Exploding through. Yeah.
Well, it's slipping through. Yeah. Slipping through that crack.
Yeah.
And that's probably not a good place to be if you do say that to your partner.
Yes, yeah, it's very good. Thankfully, I don't think I've ever done that. But
No.
yeah, but then even the fact that someone has to watch themselves doing it. Well, my dad, he always misnamed us. He always got the kids' names wrong. He would sometimes he'd even call you the dog. We had a dog called Scratch. So I don't know. And sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. You know.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed, it is.
Yeah. But the hook that I called this
Yes,
to
the
get
Christmas
people in
hook.
is Christmas, only because I was talking to you the other day and you were saying, oh yeah, Christmas is a tough time for people sometimes, and actually post Christmas people sometimes that's a time when people think about doing therapy. And
getting fit and doing therapy.
Yeah. Although my New Year's resolutions were to drink more and to do less exercise. So
how's it going?
Yeah, pretty good.
That's good.
Yeah, you set your sights low, you're never disappointed.
That's true.
Yeah, but after you said that, I was going like, oh yeah, that's it's so obvious to us that Christmas is sometimes a difficult time. In fact, I think stats even show it that people can be more suicidal, whatever. And I thought, okay, yeah, well, that's an interesting place to start because. There is something about holidays and Christmas where it can agitate us in a certain way.
Yeah.
The thought I had, and this I'll throw it out and then
Okay.
you fire in, is, at Christmas there is a lot about the ideal of families and relationships. They're everywhere. Like from Christmas cards and people send these cards to each other, which often have very beautiful pictures of their kids and their family. And
Yes.
And also in TV shows that often in movies that have very idealized forms of the family. And so my first thought was, I wonder if Christmas can be difficult for people because we get agitated by all of these images that can kind of sometimes bring up within ourselves our own dissatisfactions, our own lack.
Sure. Well, I mean, they remind us of what we don't have, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because nobody has Christmases like that.
Yeah.
And if we think we do, we're probably just remembering the Christmases from our childhood. Like when I think about my Christmas in my childhood, they were great.
Yeah.
But were they?
Yeah.
I enjoyed them, you know what I mean? But I don't remember them.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yeah.
And I know that my parents had to, go out and work and make money to buy presents and to make the food and have everybody over and to go a big palaver, right?
Yeah.
So we certainly do idealize these things, and I think if you continue to stick with the ideal and continue to believe it, then you're going to get persecuted, right? It's like we spoke about before we began about this, it's imperative to enjoy.
Yeah.
Like Christmas is the ultimate imperative to enjoy, and if you're not enjoying, you're a loser.
Yes.
Right? Okay?
Yeah.
And you're a nobody. And people don't really want to know, right? Because you get this sense that the family's all together, I don't really belong in this thing, so you're excluded.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's very difficult for people. They feel excluded, so they've nowhere to go. So they just sit in their homes or their apartments and they just bury their heads for a week, which probably isn't a bad strategy, but it's probably not good for them in that sense, right? But it is something about how they see this idealized world. It's like believing advertisements.
Yeah. Well, my friend, I've got a good friend, Jay Baker, who was the son of Tammy Faye Baker and Jim Baker, who were big evangelists back in the 80s. Okay. But they had a TV show that was very much, I think the set was basically their house, their living room. And at Christmas time, it was like the perfect turkey, it was the perfect lighting, and they had these pictures. So Jay's been sending me all of these pictures from his childhood,
right?
And it's incredible because what they were giving and what these images give is like the perfect Christmas from the fantasy of
from the picture postcard thing, right? And then everyone's at the table and the linen, and they're all stabbing themselves with forks underneath it.
Well, that's what he was saying. I mean, those were very, very difficult times for that whole family. When you look at it, you go, my goodness, the difference between the image and what was going on behind the scenes is like phenomenal.
Yeah, and it mirrors people's difficulty with coming forward for treatment or looking to talk about the bad elements because they have this ideal and it's overwhelming for them, right? And they feel that they have to believe in it. Yeah. And if I don't, then I'm flawed.
Yeah. And this, you mentioned the this injunction to enjoy, which is fascinating because people often think about, like, say, the superego. When they hear that term, the thing that they think about is something that's demanding that you be ethical or nicer to your mom or whatever. But there is this notion in psychoanalysis of like this. Actually, often the superego injunction is you're not having enough fun. Go out, enjoy more. Like a demand to to be whole, a demand to be satisfied.
Yeah.
And
I mean, you move. I mean, in psychoanalytic history, you move from the Freudian idea of the superego, which is much more about what you were talking about initially, right? You know, the strong father, and you must have ethics, and you know, it was much more strict in that sense. But the more modern kind of superego is the one of consumerism, is the one of enjoy. If you're not enjoying, then quite clearly you have a mental disorder and you need to take pills.
Yeah.
Right? So it's moved in that sense because of this erosion of the authority figure of the father, and not necessarily just the dad, but this idea of institutions and authority, the authority that's given to institutions, that has slowly eroded over time. And you know, it's the I generation, my iPhone and my iPad, and it's all about I. Okay,
yeah.
So therefore, if I'm not enjoying all this stuff that's made for me, there must be something wrong with me.
Yeah.
Right. So this imperative to enjoy is no less strict than the old superego. It's just in a different form.
Yeah.
Okay?
I mean, that feels like, that's what it feels like with Christmas, is in one way that...
It's repressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that voice, you know, that imperative is like, it feels like Christmas is a time where it's almost palpable. I mean, it feels, I mean, you were asking me why I live in Los Angeles earlier before the interview, and I was saying how actually, like, my work goes down quite well here, because whenever I say to people, you know, it's great to pursue what will make you happy, but we need freedom from the pursuit of happiness sometimes. Yes. People here intuitively know what that means, because without maybe feeling it, they're surrounded by this command to enjoy, to be famous, to be rich, to look good, to feel good, to do all of the right things. And you don't even realize how oppressive that is. I mean, you kind of know it, you maybe feel it, but it's hard to articulate. And as soon as you go...
Because it's omnipresent, right? It's
everywhere. It's just...
So it feels like the very fabric of your life.
Yeah. Like I went to, there's a coffee shop I used to go to a lot, the SX Machina, but it was super cool.
Oh yeah.
And they're always really beautiful people working there, and it just, you know, you're sitting there going, hey, all these people have an amazing life, and LA's full of that. And the sad thing is, one of the women who worked there, who I always thought would look so cool, she was you know, just dressed so great, and I think she was, maybe, I don't know what she did there, but sadly I found out that she committed suicide. And I didn't know her at all. I only, because I would drink their coffee there once a week, I always saw her. But in my head, seeing her friends and her lifestyle, I was like, oh, you know, she's got it together. That was kind of the thought.
She looks happy. She looks happy. Together. Yeah.
And then when I found that out, it was kind of, it hit me partly just sadness, and also hit me going like, oh, look at that fantasy that I had of this other that was, you know, completely ungrounded.
And you know, it may be a fantasy that she had as well, in terms of, like, I don't want to say anything about somebody who's passed away, but I do notice that in Los Angeles a lot, there's people try to be happy. Oh yeah. And generally, I have found some of these people are prone to low moods. So it's kind of like combating a low mood by trying to be happy, and then they get a bit of happiness, but it doesn't last. So it's always this kind of stumbling kind of a thing. Yeah. And it's very sad to see it, really. But what was I going to say? It kind of goes to the heart of this, the idea of the American dream, which I think is not just an American dream now, it's a Western cultural dream, right? But I heard a little anecdote on the way up. It was like, what was it about the American dream? He said, would you know why they call it the American dream? One analyst said to another, and they said no, and he said, well, you have to be asleep to believe in it.
Ah, very good.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's this going back to this imperative to enjoy, the blind obedience to that can only lead to disappointment. Yeah. Maybe happiness for one or two, in terms of one or two will get there, right? And they'll make the film or they'll make the record, it will all be good. Yeah. But for the vast majority of them, it's not really going to happen. Yeah. And that can be a very disappointing thing, because again, it goes back to the self. There must be something wrong with me. Yeah. Peter made it. I didn't make it. Why not? It's something to do with me. Yeah. Right. So the social imperative to enjoy becomes an individual responsibility, and then it's an individual's fault, and then we can see what happens from there, in terms of low mood and sometimes suicide. Yeah. Right.
And the weird thing is, this is what I love about Freud and Freud's kind of dream analysis, is that actually the American dream is a waking dream. So it's what we feel when we're walking around. When I'm in Los Angeles and I'm seeing all these people and this stuff that evokes desire.
Right. So this, when you were in this coffee shop and you saw all these people having fun and being happy, you were.
I believe in it, and even believing it for myself. And yet, when I sleep, potentially that's where I encounter the truth. Potentially when I sleep, I'll maybe have nightmares. I'll have I'll confront my traumas.
Right.
And so in the Lacanian idea is that sometimes you have to wake up in order to dream. Because weirdly, in your own dream life, you might encounter more of the truth of yourself than in your waking life, where you're thinking everything's fine, everything's good, and you're pursuing your dreams, and you maybe even think you've got it. And yet you can't sleep, or when you sleep you have nightmares, and I do find it interesting how many people I know today who have trouble sleeping, or who have serious nightmares and serious kind of disturbances of their sleep.
And it can be related to this increase in anxiety, right? This difficulty with sleeping, and that's also related then to this injunction to enjoy, right, and to be successful and to be happy. Yeah. Because if I'm not, then there's something wrong with me, so that makes you anxious, and then you get into this kind of feedback loop, right? I'm anxious, so I have to try harder to be happy and try harder to enjoy, which again leads to more and more disappointment. So you get an increase in anxiety, right? And attendant depression, because they're more or less the same thing. They're on a spectrum, right? Anxiety and depression. So that would make sense, because if you're an extremely anxious person, difficult to get to sleep, because I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to do the other, I got to make myself happy, I got to make my boyfriend or girlfriend happy, I got to make everybody happy, right? Yeah. Then I'll be happy. Yeah. Right. So there's this command, and that will keep you up at night.
Yes. That's true. So if the Christmas, and I do like
this is making sense in some way, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay. So if in a way there's a super ego injunction to enjoy, we feel it very deeply. At Christmas, it becomes almost personified. You feel it like in the pictures that you see, in the cards that your friends send.
Like you said, it's like a walking life. It becomes walking. Everything around you becomes like that. Yeah.
Becomes like that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's at this time.
Yeah. So the question then is, then what does psychoanalysis offer to the person who feels, particularly at this time, but in their life, is this injunction to have better sex, better friendships, more money, kind of being more parties, being more social. Is this notion of that you need to enjoy more? What does analysis offer?
The freedom to be incomplete and to not enjoy.
God, I feel like I set that up to knock it down, because that's exactly right. I love that. Like that's kind of the core of my work in terms of at a communal level, is this beautiful freedom not to enjoy, this beautiful freedom to embrace your incompleteness, to affirm it and even enjoy it.
And I think Zizek says, I prefer not to.
Yes.
Right? That's kind of that's how he phrases it, which I think is quite a good way of looking at things. That's
good. So
but this idea of incompleteness is extremely important.
Yeah.
Because this imperative to enjoy, it implies that there's a place that you can get to where Freud talked about this oceanic feeling that some people have, and I think a lot of people have it when they take drugs, when they take hallucinogenic drugs. They have this feeling of being at one with something and not really being in themselves anymore, being part of something bigger, which maybe goes towards more kind of Jungian kind of notions of collective unconscious and stuff like that. But to have that as an imperative to get to that place where you're not yourself anymore and you're at one with something bigger than yourself, I guess, that can be quite a command, right? That can be quite something to live up to. So to be able to say, no, I'm actually okay. Yeah. I'm not really ever going to get there. And it's not like it's a place anyway. It's a state of mind, or it's a psychical thing, I guess. But to be able to say, no, I'm not really going to get there, and I'm okay with the fact that I'm not complete, or there's a bit of me that is a bit fucked up. Yeah. Okay, that's all right. Because what psychoanalysis aims at is not what therapy aims at, which is a corrective experience, right? So therapy aims at corrective experience to adapt to your society, okay? Whereas psychoanalysis aims at looking at you and recognizing that you have a certain way of being in the world, and that way of being was something that through your symptoms you felt persecuted by, or you didn't quite understand why I was doing what I was doing, this idea of repetition, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But to kind of reorganize your relationship to these motivations and to live your life more or less the same way, but to be more content doing so.
Yes.
So this idea of losing something, the lost object, which is what the end of analysis is supposed to be, right? This, you lose something, but you gain something.
Yeah.
Okay.
In a way, you lose the lost object. Is that how you said it? Because like in the lost object,
you lose your attachment, perhaps, to the lost object.
Yeah.
Or that kind of anxious attachment to it.
And the lost object, like in a nutshell, would be. So it's like an original law. In fact, I heard one analyst use a distinction which I like between lack and loss.
Right.
So a loss is you had something and you misplace it.
Right.
And a lack is, it's not that there was something pre the lack. The lack is the loss is original. Yes. So the lost object is a type of lack. It's a type of you have this sense of incompleteness,
yes.
and that tends towards a fantasy of something that can fill that lack.
Right.
So to lose the lost object is to lose your attachment to the fantasy that there is something that can fill the lack.
That there is something beyond the lack.
Yes.
To make it whole. Right.
Yeah.
It's so you lose your attachment to that idea.
Yeah.
And you accept that I like to enjoy certain things, and I like to do this, and I like to do the other. And
yeah.
I'm okay with that. I mean, is it Shel Silverstein? The guy who writes the comic books? Not comic books.
Oh, yeah,
he wrote this one thing called The Missing Piece.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about this circle that has a missing piece. So it goes around all its life looking for the piece that will fill it. And then he gets the piece, he fills himself,
mm-hmm.
and then he stops wanting, he stops desiring, he stops needing things.
Oh, yeah.
So he stops talking to all the plants and the trees and all this kind of stuff, and he becomes like a very bored little circle. So he realizes that he needs the missing piece to keep on going.
Yeah.
You know, it's the recognition that I have this lack, but this lack motivates me or makes me look outside.
Yeah.
Makes me experience the world, makes me engage with the world.
Yeah.
And not retreat and withdraw from it.
Yeah. I mean, this all has like deep connections with philosophy and theology. So, so in theology, the two standard positions in theology are, or let's say in religious theory, is that there is a lack, a sense of incompleteness that can be filled. There was something, a previous unity or wholeness.
Yes.
There's been a loss of that, and there's a return to that. And then, depending on Eastern and Western modes, either the lack is an illusion that you have to see through, or it's an ontological reality you have to overcome, right?
And which? The Eastern mode is it's
veil of illusions.
It's
Mostly, yeah, more so in Eastern religions, you get this idea that this sense of incompleteness is a type of veil of illusions you must see through. And then in Western religions, it's more of there's a break within reality itself that has to be overcome, like Christianity in its confessional form.
Okay.
Yeah. Then the second is there is this incompleteness or lack that is that you can't overcome because of the limits of finitude, at least in this life, right? Maybe in the next life, but it's not something that you will experience here and now. There is a certain limit to being human. To a certain extent, you have to embrace it. But it's still a sense that there was something, you'll just never get it back. Yes. Then the third position, which is, and this is where I think Hegel's really interesting, but the third position, and this is where pyrotheology comes in, is the third, and it connects with Lacan, is that no, this incompleteness is neither something that you can fill now, or you have to just acknowledge that, oh, you'll never get there, but actually it's constitutive of being human. Yeah. It's not something bad, it's not something that can be filled, or we'd even want to. It's kind of like this antagonism or deadlock that we experience is actually what creates us as subjects. Mm-hmm. I mean, here's a. And
I guess but I think Lacan would have talked about that somewhat in terms of when language is introduced, we are split off from something. We are split off from another reality or another world. And it's not necessarily a negative thing that he's talking about.
Yeah.
But then that language itself has this hole in it, has this lack in it. Because
Yes.
it can't represent everything. So it can go on forever and ever and ever, but it can't represent everything. So something is missing.
Yeah.
And what is this thing that's missing?
Yeah.
It's where the unconscious comes out, right? The unconscious speaks.
Mm-hmm.
It speaks in dreams and slips of the tongue, in bumbled actions or whatever. So that's where you need to look for it to find the root of your symptom, your suffering.
Yeah.
Right.
This is, by the way, is why, and in my world, there's within the religious theory, there are a lot of people who are called progressives, theological liberals, and they hate the term generally original sin, right? All of this terminology is pretty seen as negative. I love it because original sin, and I think is actually
I love a wee bit of original sin.
I love it. I'm a good old Northern Ireland Protestant. That is it, bit of original sin.
Yes.
Is that this actually is, I think, one of the first systematizations of this type of idea, i.e. original meaning coming first and sin meaning separation or lack, that there is an original lack that is constitutive of being human. Now, in terms of how it developed theologically, that's all a bit silly.
Right, being born with original sin and
but the original kind of scholastic discussions around this, I think, were the first systematic attempts to genuinely make sense of this type of constitutive lack that makes us who we are.
Yeah. And it's driven most creativity in the world as well, right? It's like how do I represent myself? How do I describe myself and this lack that I feel, while still seeing the beauty of the world, but it's always at a distance. It's never tangible. It's never material, but it can be represented through words, through art, film, or whatever it is, right? So this is what drives us. This lack is what drives us.
Yes.
So it's quite contradictory in that sense.
Yeah. Right? And this is, by the way,
it deprives us and it drives us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I mean, this is why, again, to do a theological thing, because that's part of my area, is that this is why I like the idea of forgiveness of sin. People talk, if I pay a debt is a nothingness. It's a lack, that's something. It's a debt that keeps you embroiled in jobs you hate, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But if I pay your debt, I fill the lack. I get the debt, which is a nothingness, and I fill it with money, right?
Okay.
But if I forgive a debt, I don't fill the lack. I just render it nothing. So I take the nothingness that is something, the debt, and I say it's nothing. So I say, you don't owe me anything. I take the nothingness and render it nothing.
Okay.
So this idea of forgiveness of debt, I do think is similar to the psychoanalytic cure, which is in a sense taking the sting out of the lack, not getting rid of it, not filling it, but somehow because the problem with debt is not the debt, it's the letters that are telling you have to pay the debt. I know a few friends who got into a lot of debt.
Yeah.
And what made them alcoholics was the letters, the phone calls, the person knocking at the door saying you have to repay the debt. And some of them became bankrupt. And the bankruptcy didn't pay the debt. It just stopped all the debtors. And so I kind of think of sometimes a society as those debtors who keep coming around, knocking on your door saying, you have to pay the debt. You have this lack. You have to fill that lack, right? You have this duty to fill the lack.
Yeah.
And somehow in the analytic setting, you help people exorcise that injunction, to be, I suppose, navigate that lack in a more healthy way.
Yeah, and I guess that's the main side effect of it, right? Is to understand that in terms of psychoanalysis, in terms of the cure or the effect of psychoanalysis. I don't know if it's correct to call it a cure as of yet, but certainly that's a very it can be a very oppressive thing for people. That the knocking on the door.
Yes.
You have a debt. We don't know. It doesn't have materiality in effect, but you're right. The people knock on the door. You get the letter. So there is this pressure, right? It's just a constant kind of a pressure people feel. Yeah. And that's a very oppressive thing. Yeah.
You have this I read the Jewish creation story as an Oedipal story. So you've got Adam and Eve. Yeah. You've got God. You've got a prohibition, right? And and Adam and Eve break through the prohibition to get the piece of fruit that they think will make them like God, whole and complete. It's not a blessing, it's a curse, it's a disaster. So you have this Oedipal thing where Oedipus wants to sleep with his mother, fathers the prohibition, he breaks through the father's prohibition, sleeps with the mother, it's a disaster. And in the story that I really like is there's a serpent that is saying, if you eat that apple, you'll be like God, you'll be whole and complete. And we think that we have to obey that voice. There's something out there, a sacred apple, a lost object, that if we get, we will be like God, because God traditionally lacks the lack. Right, so you will lack the lack, you'll be whole and complete.
Yeah.
And we obey that voice, we pursue the sacred fruit, the lost object.
Yeah.
And if we don't get it, we're unhappy. And if we do get it, it's an absolute disaster.
Right.
And the idea is actually to exorcise the serpent. And I kind of do see certain connections between the serpent and the superego. You know?
And like the advertising industry.
Yes,
For example.
exactly.
That could be the modern day serpent.
Yes, that's it. Perfect,
Okay.
yeah.
But you do have like, you know, the relationship between Freud and like the advertising world. Edward Bernays, and he was Freud's nephew, I believe.
Is it nephew? Yeah.
Bernays, yeah. So he started all the Madison Avenue ad agencies and public relations firms, and giving people what they want. This idea of you know, creating desire.
I mean, that's like the dark side. Like, isn't it interesting that this incredible science that's developing, a theory of science, and this a kind of the heresy then starts the advertising.
If you think about psychology generally, I mean, you think about what it can do, the benefits it can bring to people in terms of understanding, and some of the uses it's put to, like in the US military, for example, in terms of interrogation techniques, etc., how to break somebody down, right? So you can always use the good for, well, not the good, you can use methods for good or bad, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a fire. Fire can cook food or it can burn you. And when you're dealing with anything like
true,
this, it's going to go either direction. What I think, one of the reasons why I wanted to chat with you is, right, so a lot of my work takes these theories. I'm trained primarily in philosophy, and I'm interested in how these ideas actually help us understand philosophical questions, the nature of universality. However, the theory actually developed primarily in the clinic, you know, for the helping actual people on the couch. And one of the ways that I square that, and that's why I want to have conversations with people like you, because I want to see how this works in its original context and not just in
the clinical context.
In the clinical context, is fascinating to me. But something that philosopher and theologian Paul Tillich talked about, which I really like, is that this is a bit of an adaptation of what he said, but is that the role of the psychotherapist he was talking about, or the psychoanalyst, is you start off with an individual who has maybe a very concrete individual problem they're facing. They're going through Christmas, they're struggling with a broken relationship. You start there. And very gradually you potentially help them see that the problems that they face there's something about conflict and struggle as part of life, and that actually we often are getting something out of that or whatever. So very gradually,
it sounds like you're enjoying this struggle and the pain. You're enjoying your pain.
Okay. Yeah. And then you help very gradually. I guess someone maybe gets to see that kind of struggle is universal to some extent. They widen their view. So it's out there, and then go like on the other side, the role of the priest, the pyrotheological priest. It starts on the very grandiose. They talk about the nature of reality as antagonism, and talk about the non-at-oneness of the world. But that actually connects with individual people. It does start to people can begin to find some relief in their own individual lives by hearing that message.
Sure, yeah, of course.
And actually at some point you meet in the middle. For some people, there's very acute reasons why they need to see someone on a weekly basis, or 2 times or 3 times a week. But for others, to be part of a community where these ideas are expressed in art, in music and poetry is important. But actually they're kind of doing the same thing, but just on a different level.
You know what I mean? Psychoanalysis isn't a cure for all. Right, okay. I mean, there are certain people who suffer very acutely with things, that psychoanalysis being a more drawn out kind of an affair wouldn't work for them, because they're faced, like they're thinking about ending their lives immediately, or whatever it may be. It's not going to work for people like that, okay? So they need to have other avenues, and they do, and there are services for that. And then there are people who do find relief in the idea of God and the idea of like community around God.
Yeah.
And that's fine too.
Yeah.
You know?
Now, the interesting thing about the theological work that I do is, interestingly, it's different from the confessional notion of God, because in the confessional notion of God, kind of God is kind of, it's almost like the counselor who's going to fix you, help you, make you feel good, you know.
Yeah.
God, and we all, here's a similarity. If I go to see you as an analysand, I do go with a certain fantasy that you're going to fix me,
Sure.
right? That you're going to make me better, and you know, you allow that fantasy to a certain extent. That's what brought me to the table. Like if I came to you and you said right from the start, I am going to get you back with your partner, I ain't going to like be able to fix that, you know, maybe we'll get to the point where you're able to have a more everyday unhappiness about it, right? I'd probably go away because I don't want that. In the same way, people go to church often because they want God to be what will fix things, make things good, make things right.
Yes.
Now, most confessional religion plays into that. Pyrotheology is the idea that God is a self-divided subject, and that so the idea is that very gradually you realize that God, or the absolute, or reality itself, is itself in conflict, is divided, is not at one. And as you identify with, so it's similar, I think it's similar to analysis in the sense of, as the liturgical structure becomes the stand-in for God. Just like you maybe become the stand-in for the mother or father or whatever. And then very gradually the liturgical structure enacts doubt, complexity and ambiguity. And the liturgical structure enacts the death of God. Okay. And if you, as the congregant, are symbolically identifying with the liturgy as, in a sense, God, then as that liturgical structure enacts doubt, complexity, ambiguity, that can shift that internal object, God. Yeah. And you become more comfortable with incompleteness and uncertainty and all of that. But it's happening at a very communal level. So
this is the liturgical thing you're talking about? What does that relate to exactly when you say liturgical?
Liturgical, just basically the art form of the sermon, the music, the whole theatre, the theatre of the theatrical dimension, yes,
services or whatever you want to call it. Okay.
Sorry. But what I do with Pyrotheology is it's not in the confessional church, so it's a very different type of liturgical thing, but it uses the same elements: music, words, art, to enact this type of and almost in the same way that maybe if I'm projecting my father onto you, and yet you're not reacting the way my father would. And in fact, you're kind of impotent in a way. You're not giving me advice. You're not judging me. You're not telling me I'm good or bad. And maybe at a certain point, then I start to experience a shift in that internal object, Father, through basically the fact that I've put that onto you and you're not.
Well, it's almost like a de-identification, right? I mean, you've identified with your father. Let's take your father, for example. You've identified with him in such a way that you're trying to regurgitate that with me as an analyst or whatever, but it's about how I respond. If I respond to the transference, like we said, like if we look at it and go, do you know what you're doing now? You're looking at me as your father and blah blah blah. Then it's not effectual, right? But if I answer in a different way or don't answer, then you have to question your position vis-a-vis your father.
Yes.
Right, okay, and the reality of that notion that you have about him.
Yes.
Because a lot of this is about, going back to Oedipus, etc., demythologizing your family, like going back to Christmas, demythologizing Christmas, right? Yeah. Like, what was my Christmas like when I was 7? Oh, it was great, but my mother was running around like a blue arse fly, cooking, and my dad was out working all the hours God sent to get the presents, okay? Yeah. So it was a bit of a drag for them.
Yeah.
And then we can have a little bit more of a nuanced relationship with those people if they're still living.
Yeah.
Right?
But see, that's exactly the way you described it with the word de-identification.
Yeah, because we have such a strong identification, we have to de-identify in order to re-identify then, like this goes back to the idea that we were talking about the lack, right? To re-identify, like letting go of a certain attachment to that lack.
Yes.
Okay,
but that,
I'm really catching. Sorry, go on.
Oh no, this is great because that's what the pyrotheological liturgical structure is trying to do is without, and it doesn't say it, it doesn't express it.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't, like you said at the beginning as well. Like you don't stand outside of it and go, oh, this is going on. It's enacted. So in the theater of this liturgy, you have a certain, and for me, God is basically the name for the absolute, right? So the whatever the absolute is,
everything, the all.
And for me, our natural understanding of the all is that it lacks the lack. It is whole, it's complete, it's substantial.
Yeah.
And therefore, when you enter into the liturgical space, is what we did in Belfast, and a great nationalist bar called the Menagerie every month.
Where is that, in the city?
Yeah, in the South Belfast.
Is it still there?
It's still there. Only opens occasionally now.
Right,
There's big IRA arms find in it. We had all closed down, but it reopened after that. It's a good spot. But what you did is by the person's projecting onto the liturgy, God, the absolute, they're also expecting a certain thing back.
A return.
A return, and they don't get that return. What instead they get back is a fracture. One is the liturgical structure holds them in their anxiety and in their feelings, but also then de-identifies them from what the theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer called the Deus Ex Machina God, which is the God of wholeness, completeness, will fix all your problems, all of that.
Yes.
And here's the trick, not that I'm trying to kind of convert you to pyrotheology, but if you want to raise a hand, you're welcome.
Sure.
Is that the idea is if you're able to change a person's experience of the absolute,
right,
it'll also help them, because there's all these ersatz, absolutes in the world, sex, drugs, consumerism, all these other different ways that we're trying to find wholeness and completeness. But if you can create a liturgical structure over a prolonged period of time in someone's life, that can help free them from these other types of kind of absolutes that these. So basically, it basically subtracts you libidinally from a frenetic pursuit of a lost object. That's the kind of the aim. So that's what I call salvation.
Okay. That's what you call salvation.
Yeah.
Well, certainly salvation in this world, it sounds like it. I mean, I'm kind of reminded of that movie Silence, you know?
Oh, yeah.
You know, and
like
these people are being persecuted for their beliefs, and they're kind of calling out to God for an answer, and nothing comes. It's silence. And you have to pursue with the thing, with the belief, even when there's nothing come back. And that's what faith, belief then becomes faith, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It changes, it morphs, and then maybe what you're talking about happens for people.
Yes,
I've never had those ones because I've never been persecuted for my beliefs like that.
But the ultimate moment, I don't know if this is in the film or not. You tell me. It was a while since I saw it.
Yeah, it's been a while since I saw it too.
Yeah. But is that so? At first, you cry out, and there's silence, and the first thing is maybe the acceptance of that silence and the embrace of it. But for me, the theological move is not that you embrace the silence as a type of experience of the absurd. The universe is not giving me what I want.
Yeah.
It's not a withdrawal. It's that the true kind of move, what Hegel calls absolute knowledge, is whenever you realize that the silence is the answer. That faith is not I'm able to believe despite the silence. It's when you have faith in the silence itself. It's when when you embrace the incompleteness itself.
Right.
So for Hegel, it's like what you do is you're always right at any point in history. You've got antagonisms and even questions, and as you answer those questions, you feel like you're progressing to a point where, at least hypothetically, you will have answered everything. But Hegel says that basically, what you do is you go to deeper and deeper contradictions. You're not progressing towards less and less contradiction. You're actually going deeper and deeper and deeper. And he says, and then there's a certain point when you see that contradiction is intractable, and that's when you get to absolute knowledge. For him, is because that's when you realize that you're not trying to move away from contradiction. In everyday life you are.
Yeah.
But actually, the real trick is that you realize that there's contradiction hard baked into reality, and that when you can accept that, you enter into a different modality of being.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So that for me, that's what Hegel calls absolute knowledge.
Right.
And that for me is almost like what seems to happen in analysis. It's not trying to get you away from the contradiction. It actually is, you start off as going, I hate my partner, I'm really annoyed with them. And then maybe you go to a deeper contradiction. It's like, well, actually, I hate my mum, I'm really annoyed at her. And then you maybe get to a deeper contradiction, which is I hate life, right? Life is difficult, and the trauma of its existence. And what you find is you're not like getting rid of contradictions, you're just getting more and more intractable until you go, oh. And it's like, and this is where quantum mechanics becomes interesting to me, because at the level in quantum mechanics, you go like at a quantum level, it seems like antagonism and deadlock is part of reality itself.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. Okay. So it sounds a little bit like this idea of traversing the fantasy, right?
Yeah. Let's talk about that. Yeah.
Well, I don't really understand it too well. I mean, it's a very difficult concept, to be honest with you. But it's almost like the unconscious has a yes and a no. There's a yes and a no in the unconscious. So this idea of intractability, it's true and it's not true. There's a yes, there's a no. So it's not this either or of normal thinking. Okay, it's seeing that there's a yes and a no.
Right.
And living with that.
Yes.
Because when there's a yes and a no, there's something incomplete about that too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you got it. It's about learning to live with that. There's a yes and a no inside of me.
Yeah. And that feels like what's fascinating. This is why I like Zizek's work, actually, because especially in recent years, he's spent a lot of time getting proficient, at least kind of like at a basic level with physics, and he's connecting the Lacanian psychoanalytic ideas with Hegel's philosophy and with some developments in quantum mechanics.
Okay.
To say that this this kind of, like a symptom in a way, the basic notion of a symptom really is it's a congealment of contradiction. Like maybe if someone's biting their clenching their jaw, they want to speak and they want to stay silent or whatever it is.
Yes.
That actually isn't just part of subjective reality or whatever. It's actually like the wave particle duality is a type of expression of that in physics.
Okay.
Or Gödel's on incompleteness theorem in mathematics, which really shows that when mathematics becomes so strong that it describes reality, it falls into contradiction. That's fascinating because Gödel himself said, well, that means that mathematics can't describe reality. That's what Kant said, by the way. Kant said, if you use reason incredibly deeply and consistently, you get to contradictions.
Yes.
There's freedom, there's determinism. The universe is eternal, it's had a beginning. God exists, God doesn't exist, all of that.
Yes.
But then Kant turned around and said, so therefore reason doesn't work, right? At that level. So stick with sciences, because obviously we fall into contradiction and that means there's something wrong. But then Hegel comes along and goes, no.
Contradiction is baked into the pie. That's the actual pie.
That's the pie. So you actually had more of an insight than you thought. You pulled back from the central insight.
Yes.
And that's why I loved what Freud was doing. I mean, actually, there's a guy called Todd McGowan. I don't know if you've read his work. He's a film theorist, but he's a Lacanian as well.
I haven't read him, but I've heard him.
Yeah, he's very good. But he actually said that one of the reasons why Hegel is so difficult to read is that Hegel was, he's really pushing the philosophical language of his day to extremes and also trying to work it out himself. But that actually the Freudian language of the unconscious can help us understand Hegel better, because there was something of what Hegel's doing with absolute knowledge, which is similar to what Freud is doing with the idea of the subject, which is similar now to what we see within even biology, evolutionary theory. What's that if it's not, biology is the symptom of the antagonism of reality, like the conflict, right? And similar in mathematics, similar in quantum mechanics, like all of these different areas are coming to something similar.
Yes, well, it's like a unifying theory, right?
Yeah,
it's becoming a unifying theory
of non-unity.
Of contradiction, of difference, of a lack of knowledge, and I guess modern day science, my understanding of it is that it aims at like yes and no kind of stuff, right? I mean, it's empirically based, obviously, and it aims towards knowing one thing or the other, right? It aims at separating things out.
Yeah.
And I think what you're talking about with quantum mechanics is it leaves it as an open field, right? And there is all this stuff in it, and which is what the nature of reality is, I believe.
Yeah.
Like, so I think science doesn't help the cause of psychoanalysis, like hard sciences, positivistic sciences.
No.
You know, human sciences and this idea of like social sciences have kind of gone out the window, because this idea of replicatability is very, very difficult in social sciences. You can't really replicate things.
Yes, I can't.
It's like you can't step in the same river twice, right? You know, there's just so many moving parts that you can't replicate studies.
Yeah.
So you can never get that predictability. So therefore, they say it's not science.
The other thing I love about psychoanalysis, and that different from psychology, is that I remember in my own psychoanalysis there was something that came up. I think it was actually like I was talking about an ex. And I said, she was younger than me. She was 5 years younger than me or more. And then the analyst was Bruce Fink. He was like, well, what do you think that means or whatever? And I said, well, that's just very common. I said, like, most people I know, a lot of guys are older, the woman's younger. And he said, yeah, but what does it mean to you? And what I realized is, oh yeah, of course, even if you do something that's completely normal, you could be doing it for pathological. There could be a pathology behind it, or you could be doing something that is completely out of sync with normality, and there's no pathological dimension to it at all.
Right.
And that was that was a really nice little insight for me. It's like, oh yeah, it's like psychoanalysis doesn't deal with averages, partly because they treat the individual as a universe, as a singular, but also because the average wouldn't tell you anything about the person. Really, not very much. Like, no. you could be. I get up at 9 o'clock. I get up at 8 o'clock. Go to my job at 9. Come home at 5. Dress in a suit every day, 5 days a week. Like that, you go like, that's the weirdest thing. That could be your fetish, right? But it's simply because it's normal. Anyone else would tend to go, oh, that's statistically normal. So there's nothing we need to analyze about it. Yes. But I love that anything is open to analysis.
Yeah, well, anything in your life for sure is, because, the symptom, as one of my professors said, is the symptom is like something on the back of your head. Everybody can see it but you. Yeah. Right? So, it's like these blind spots or whatever people call them. We all have them and we can't see them. Yeah. Right? So, like in that sense, getting up and getting dressed in a suit 5 days a week, that could be pathological, I guess. Yeah. But it depends why are you doing it?
Yes, exactly.
What's it about for you?
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, like this idea that sometimes a cigar is not a cigar.
Yeah.
And sometimes it is. And sometimes it is and it isn't.
Yes. Sometimes it's a penis. And then maybe to finish off, because I do want to come around to the traversing the fantasy.
Oh, I was hoping you'd forgotten about that.
Yeah. Well, traversing the fantasy and kind of ending transference. I want to mention two ways that I think about those terms and then see what you think. Yeah. Because in my work, two of the things I want to help people to free people from is, one, the idea of a guru. So I talk about the idea of the last guru. Good
luck with that in Los Angeles. There's a lot of gurus here.
There's a lot of gurus here.
There are.
Yeah, I know, and it frustrates me a lot.
Like
I know
Eckhart Tolle and like what's his name?
Yeah.
The Indian guy?
There's what's his name? I was at an event with him once.
Yeah.
Those, and there's lots of them. There's loads of them.
Yes.
Part of my work is the idea of, you do need gurus, as in we tend to look for gurus, but what you want is a guru who basically disillusions you of all gurus, right? So this is the last guru, which I see in psychoanalysis in a way. You go to a person to go, you're going to fix me. And the analyst, part of what they do is they disillusion you of that. Very gradually you terminate at the end. So part of my work is the end of transference, the end of where the person is able to take responsibility for themselves. So that's one. And then the other is the loss of the fantasy of some utopia, some fantasy of a wholeness and completeness.
They're related.
They're related, they're very interconnected. And that's what I think of when I think of traversing the fantasy. It's you don't get rid of your fantasies and your desires and all that, but you change how you orient yourself in relation to them. And you almost focus on the struggle and the not having and the enjoyment of I think of my own work. So pyrotheology is a good example. Is that so? What is pyrotheology? It's nothing. It's just a made-up word that I'm now colonizing with meaning over the course of my life. And every course I give, I try to define what it is. And after every course, I feel like I didn't quite get it.
Yes.
And out of the continued failure to define what it is, it's starting to take shape. It starts to become something. But it will never be complete. And my enjoyment is, in a sense, the incompleteness of the project that keeps
you coming back.
Keeps me coming back.
Yeah.
Now, if I had a fantasy about it, I would be always so depressed that I haven't named it. I would be so always trying to write the book that grasps at all of that.
Yeah.
So traversing fantasy for me is a weird way of you're motivated to work and to do things, but you're freed from the fantasy that this is going to somehow kind of like give you the oceanic oneness that you want.
Yeah, you're liberated from that constraining idea.
Yeah.
That there is an end.
There is an end, exactly. Yeah. So that for me is the last guru and the traversing the fantasy, or the end of transference and traversing the fantasy, broadly speaking, in the type of work that I do. I mean, is that comparative to the way you think of those terms, or how do you think of it in the clinical setting?
Well, in terms of the end of transference, I don't know if transference really ends in that sense. I think one becomes more aware of it, and can change like the intensity or the level of the transference, and can recognize something that's maybe happening or in the genesis of happening. And I think that can certainly be a side effect of analysis, and should be, that we don't transfer over as much or don't expect as much, etc., in the transference relationship. So that certainly would be a benefit of psychoanalysis. Traversing the fundamental fantasy is quite, my understanding of it is quite similar to what you described, okay? So yes, I wouldn't be too far off in agreement with you there. I don't really know enough about it, because it's a very complicated notion, and it's also because it's so singular and individual that what is the fundamental fantasy? Right.
Yeah.
This is, so what is this thing? It's a thing made up of reality, fragments of reality, fragments of our experience, fragments of imaginary things that we have kind of compressed onto this. So it's an extremely individual thing, but it's the support, I guess, for what keeps our subjectivity going, because we, according to the theory, is we create this fundamental fantasy, or it comes into being because we feel this demand or desire from the other bit, usually our parents, usually the mother, because they're the most involved, this desire that's insatiable, and you feel that you're going to get swallowed up by it. So this fantasy comes into play in order to stop you being swallowed up. So if you can imagine then how difficult it is for people to traverse something that keeps them alive.
Yes.
How do you navigate that, right? It's an extremely difficult thing, and it can take more than one pass.
Yeah.
Right? It might be something you have to go around a lot. And so this idea of being stuck is where people generally get to, this idea of they're stuck in this place, and they can't move, they can't free themselves from, because there's two elements to being stuck, I guess. There's you being stuck, and then the place that you're stuck in, but they're together, right?
Right.
They fit. Okay, so how do you dislodge yourself from that, but still remain a subject or remain sane? Okay, so how do you traverse that? It's a very delicate thing. Because
as you're saying, like, this is in a sense what holds the person together. So this is why there's so much resistance in analysis, because it can feel like you're asking someone to give up what makes them who they are.
Well, you are in a way.
Yeah, because it's not working.
You're asking them. Yeah, you're saying to them they should give it up.
Yeah.
Because really this, and then go back to the transference, because this has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
the transference and the fundamental fantasy are obviously intimately related. I mean, when you think about Lacan, he wrote one of his seminars is called The Four Fundamental Concepts of Psychoanalysis, which were, according to him, the unconscious, repetition, the drive, and transference. Okay, so these are things that are not tangible in any way. They're outside of our experience, right? The drive, transference, repetition, and the unconscious. But these are the fundamental building blocks of psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
So it's almost like when you talk about gravity, right? Gravity is a theory that's clearly true, but there's no way to prove it really, but everything else falls from that or flows from that idea.
Yeah.
The same with these ideas of unconscious repetition, drive and transference.
Yeah.
Without these ideas, and the reality of them comes through the work.
Yeah.
You see it as an analyst, analyzon, you see them in the work. You begin to recognize them happening.
I mean, Kant would call them like transcendental categories in a way. It's like, it's not,
right, okay,
they're kind of like what you have to assume, because they come into being like never directly but indirectly through.
They're assumptions, Peter, but they're also very, very real.
Yeah.
You know, and they show themselves by displacement into our lives.
Yeah.
And the things that we do and the things that we say.
And another thing then, because you mentioned it's fundamental fantasy and the end of transference, you know, they're intimately interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
Another one that is connected with my work and with that is then this idea of the other.
Yeah.
And just to kind of go, like, my understanding of fantasy is that anxiety is created through the question, what does the other want from me?
Right.
So in a way, the child is creating fantasies to kind of get rid of the anxiety of not knowing what, say, the mother and the father want from them. We create these fantasies that then in some way kind of give us a place in the world, answer the question, what does the other want from me? So part of the death of the big other is part of this idea of traversing the fantasy, which is part of this notion of ending transference. Like, these three concepts seem to be in some way intertwined.
Yeah, well, the big other is something that we see as total. Okay, like this idea of like the one or whatever that we've spoken a little bit about. I think that's what the child sees, that the other as total. So they have to create this fantasy because they can get subsumed by this big other. Okay, so they have to create the fantasy as a buffer between them and the other.
Yeah, because like I always thought of it, and you know the material better. So I always thought of it as kind of like the fantasy was, you know, just answering the question, what does the other want?
Yeah.
But actually, this also makes sense, and it brings back stuff that I've heard but have never been able to maybe fit. Is that the fantasy is, you say, it's a protection mechanism, but to not be consumed,
a buffer, right?
Yeah. And how does that function? And so basically, a child can feel like the anxiety of being everything, say, to the mother, for example. And so, in order to start to find a way to differentiate themselves, they
create this fantasy. Well, I mean, if you think about something like a phobia, right? A phobia is like of spiders. Let's say spiders, right? So a phobia, from a psychoanalytic viewpoint, a phobia is a way to circumscribe anxiety into an object, i.e. a spider.
Yeah.
So I can take all the anxiety that's in the world around me that I feel every day, and I can circumscribe it in this little spider. And that's what I'm scared of. But what is it about the spider? Because I'm 6 foot tall and the spider is this size. So I mean, is it really that scary? No, it's not. Like, on a logical, reasonable level, it's not. But there is some logic to why the child has done that, or why the person is afraid of spiders.
Yeah.
Because it's not just a certain type of spider, it's all spiders.
Yes.
Or whatever it is. You know, there's these peculiarities to these things. So going back to this idea of the fantasy as a buffer, that's essentially what it's doing, right? It acts like in a similar way to a phobia, psychoanalytically speaking.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so it acts as a buffer against this
overwhelming big other. Yeah.
Okay, but then the work of it is to see that the other lacks. There is no big other, really.
Yes.
There's just a little other. It's just you and me, and the big other isn't really there, even though we kind of almost wanted to be there.
Yeah.
It's not there.
Yeah.
And that also plays into the traversing.
Yes. Yeah, see, that's the connection for me in my work. It's like the idea of God, you know, in Christ saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? So this idea of God experiencing the loss of God, the lack of God, is in a way the acknowledgement that the other is also divided, which then weakens the fundamental fantasy and is connected to the weakening of transference. So all of these things are interconnected.
Yes.
And that's kind of what pyrotheology is trying to do in a nutshell. It's kind of a type of Lacanian theology, very similar to what Zizek's doing, obviously, you know. But
I think it, like, I don't know enough about theology to really opine this, but I would imagine, I think that that's kind of what Jesus was about, right?
That's
According to the parables or whatever, right?
Yeah.
That was the message that he kind of gave.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, see, that's what I think. And it's funny, like, that some of the most interesting theological work at the moment is being done by people who are not part of the church, not theistic, not Christian in that sense. Even Todd McGowan is, he doesn't associate with anything religious, but he's arguing for Hegelian Christianity, and Zizek is arguing for Christianity, and because they're making the counterclaim that this is more true of the text than what we get, which is this kind of what I call a religious interpretation, which is similar to the
this idea of original sin and etc., like there's badness before goodness, and
although funnily enough, my critique of someone like Calvin or Luther is that they're not Calvinistic enough. Like original sin isn't original enough.
It's a proper Northern Irish Protestant speaking.
Exactly. Yeah, you got to get it even darker. So because weirdly, the idea of original sin is it's not original, because there's always there's always a wholeness before it. But if you take it seriously, original lack, you go like, then you get to a Lacanian theology, which is that there's something about lack that is inherent to creatures of language. So I want to take Luther and turn him up another notch.
Right. Okay. And then I suppose we finish on Zizek talks about before the universe was created. He said that was kind of like the perfect time. Everything was in sync, and then something went missing. Something cracked. Yeah. Right. There was some kind of gap opened up, and that's where it all comes from. Yes. So it comes from a lack.
Yes. Although now Zizek says, he kind of goes like that. Even now Zizek says, but that idea of a kind of a peace, a perfect peace before the fall is
but an illusion.
Is an illusion. Yeah. So Zizek's kind of mature work, which he's always been there, but he's being very explicit about it now, as he's saying that actually what comes first is the fall, and that. Right. And it generates the illusion of a pre-fall. Okay. And that's why he's trying to get into quantum mechanics, because although it's very complicated mathematics, but he's
the lost object that never was.
Exactly.
That's what they say in psychoanalysis, right? Yeah. There's a lost object, and it was never there.
It was never there.
But it's still lost.
So in one sense, a theology that still has, or a philosophy that still has this idea of a quiet kind of oneness that then falls. There's the whole problem of what is the fall? But if you go with this notion of less than nothing, that nothingness itself has a certain deadlock, then that's a way of explaining why everything exists. There you go. So we've covered a lot. We've gone from the struggle of Christmas, which is the super injunction to enjoy. Indeed. The cure, I'll say, of psychoanalysis is the freedom not to enjoy. And then how what I'm doing in my work is in some sense analogous to that experience for community. There you go. I think we did okay.
I think so.
Thanks very much. All right. Oh, by the way, I want to say Sean practices in Los Angeles. You've got a private practice.
In West Los Angeles.
Yeah. And what's your areas of specialization? And if you work with all sorts.
Everything and anything. Psychoanalysis works with the whole person, so it doesn't matter whether it's anxiety, depression, addiction. They're the symptoms. Yeah. And we work with them to look at what's actually going on.
Yeah. So I'm going to put the details with this video and with this audio, but if you live in Los Angeles, at the greater area of Los Angeles, and you're thinking that you might want to kind of do some sort of psychoanalytic stuff, then follow the website, have a look at it, see if Sean might be a good fit. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.